Hello and welcome to another episode of Secrets of an Everyday Mystic. I'm your host, Becky Magnolia. Today's interview is with Stormy King. Stormy has a vast collection of fun and fascinating stories. His mom and aunt, who together raised him, hung out back in the mid and late 60s with the likes of the Grateful Dead, Wavy Gravy, Owsley Stanley, Tim Leary, to name a few. And Stormy grew up in this environment. So when he was just 12 years old, he was at the Watts acid test. That's right. At 12 years old, he got to be part of the Watts acid test, and was at the Monterey Pop Festival and actually got to go on stage and help clean up the tablas at the end of Ravi Shankar's performance. Stormy has some really fascinating stories. His mom actually became good friends with Richard Alpert, who later became Ram Dass. They became dear friends throughout her life. So if you want to hear a little bit more about Stormy and this crazy era of the mid and late 60s and early 70s and want to learn a little bit more about Ram Dass from the perspective of a child, really, have a listen. It's a fun interview. I hope you enjoy.
In the 50s, when I was a little bitty child, I was born in 53. My mom and my aunt started studying Edgar Casey and Aldous Huxley and some of these other teachers in the 50s that were explaining to people that there were different states of consciousness available than what was normal, right? And then my aunt, my mom's younger sister, was a art teacher in Mendocino, which is a very hippie enclave north of San Francisco. In 1963, it's a very small town. Somebody gave her peyote, which is a psychedelic material.
Yeah.
And this changed everything for her because she saw colors she didn't know existed. She felt a connection to a spirit of the universe that she hadn't been aware of. And she went and told my mom all about this and convinced her to check it out also. So in 1964, they traveled from Sacramento, where we live, to Esalen Institute on the Big Sur coast of California, south of Monterey, for a weekend seminar. And the presenters were Timothy Leary, Richard Alpert, and Ralph Metzner, who had previously written a book called The Psychedelic Experience that my mom and my aunt had read. And I got Timothy Leary's autograph in our copy. And because that's how my mom did this. She got autographs, she took pictures, and she saved everything.
Yeah.
She saved everything, and I inherited it. So my mom met Richard Alpert at this seminar, and they hit it off. They became friends, and they stayed friends. They stayed close friends for a decade. In 1966, before he went to India, we were living in this big house right on the beach in Venice, California, near LA. We had become friends with Owsley Stanley is famous for manufacturing LSD. And his protege, Timothy Scully, learned from him how to manufacture LSD. Okay. These were close friends of my mom's. Okay. And that's kind of interesting. It's a little bit of a side note, but my aunt, Timothy Leary, was busted in Texas for 2 joints. Right. Yeah. And he was looking at 30 years for 2 joints.
Right.
My aunt became the head of the West Coast Timothy Leary Defense Fund. And they held an event in early 1966, late 1965. They held an event as a fundraiser in San Francisco. And that's where my mom met Owsley. Okay. And Owsley was there with the Grateful Dead because they lived in LA for 6 months in 66. And Owsley invited my mom and aunt to the Watts acid test in February 1966. My aunt brought me and my cousin along to operate a hand cranked strobe light. So my introduction. Now I didn't take any LSD, but I was there with the Grateful Dead, with Wavy Gravy, with the Merry Pranksters with Owsley, at the Watts acid test in early 1966.
And how old were you again?
12.
You were 12.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, if you've ever read the book, The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, which is a very famous book, okay? My mom is in there, but not by her name, okay? There's a kind of an interview about the Watts acid test, and the interviewee is talking about the different things that happened in the Watts acid test. And she mentions this much older lady, and she ends up calling her like the good witch. Right? That was my mom.
Oh!
My mom was the good witch of the Watts acid test.
That's awesome. That makes me, oh my goodness. And so tell me about the Watts acid test a little bit. So, Grateful Dead's there, Wavy Gravy. These people are just give me the stormy eye view of this. Well,
it was crowded. Now, Tim Scully was there at he was Owsley's protege. Tim Scully and our good friend Don Douglas went on in the late 60s to manufacture 4 or 5 million hits of orange sunshine LSD in Denver. And there's a documentary called The Sunshine Makers about that. And Tim Scully and I are friends to this day. He's part of my extended family, right? And so I checked with him. I wrote a blog. One of my blog postings on my website is about the Watts acid test. And I checked with him to see what his memories were about the event. And honestly, we didn't remember it very much the same at all. But the parts that I recall most clearly is that it was crowded and it was hot, and that there were people coming through the windows because the entranceway was clogged and they couldn't get in that way. Okay, and that in fact, in the electric Kool-Aid acid test, it talks about the strobe light changing speeds to keep time with the music, and that was me doing that. I remember keeping time to the music, okay, because it was a hand cranked strobe light, right? Right, and it was this big contraption thing that my aunt had constructed, and then the other part I do remember really well is that it took forever for the music to come on, and people were just standing around like hours. There was a complication with the electronics, and Bear was Owsley Stanley was nicknamed Bear, never the Bear, just Bear. Okay, Bear, and he always smelled like patchouli. He was working frantically to get something fixed so that the music could come on.
Yeah. And so did the Grateful Dead play that night? Was that?
Yes, they did play, and there's a tiny little clip of the audio somewhere available, but it isn't very much. I don't know why. I guess they didn't record the whole thing.
So how do you remember, like, just taking it in? I mean, obviously, like at 12, like this is just normal. This is like for the adults there. They're like, they're like, this is new, this is exciting, our world is changing. But for a kid, it's just kind of a status quo thing. Like, I mean, like bring me in, like with the senses. Like, so you said it was crowded, it was hot. How were you feeling? What was your mood? Like, were you enjoying it? Were you overwhelmed?
Oh yeah. I mean, it was bizarre. There were adults acting in very bizarre ways. Dancing and tripping. Right? Yeah. Now, I had already taken LSD.
Okay.
Right? My mom gave me this very pure LSD just before I turned 12 in the fall of 1965. And it was not even illegal at the time. Okay. And we did this as a chemically induced spiritual awakening. It was always done in the proper set and setting. We had candles and incense, and we played Indian music, and we read spiritual literature to each other, mostly the Book of Tao. Okay. And for the next half a dozen years, that's the only way I did it. When I was a child, it was never something I did recreationally.
Right.
It was always, in fact, we got we got in the back door at some Grateful Dead concerts because we had met them, we knew them,
Yeah.
and they knew that we knew Owsley really well,
Yeah.
right? And I remember at a Grateful Dead concert in LA, some guy's coming up to me. I was dancing, and he says, "Are you tripping? Are you tripping? You trip, right?" And I'm like, "No, I didn't do it there, you
Yeah.
know." I
Yeah.
mean, I don't think I would have done it if anybody had given me one, but it just wasn't what I did.
So for you, it was, let's just go into that because I think that's fascinating and controversial.
Oh
For
yeah,
an
yeah,
11-year-old boy to be
yeah.
doing acid. So
Right.
let's go into that a little bit. So
Okay, so
what
when I wrote that blog about
yeah,
um the Monterey Pop Festival,
yeah,
okay, I checked with Tim Scully and I showed it to him, and he was grateful that I included a big long paragraph about the ethics of giving
yeah.
LSD to a child,
And
right?
right,
Because he made the LSD,
right.
he was a little concerned about what had
Yeah,
happened with,
yeah, yeah,
and in that paragraph, I discussed it in terms of um, my mom's view was that it would have, by today's standards, that's child abuse.
right, right.
But in her view, it would have been child. She was so excited and so moved and so taken by the new worlds that can
Yeah,
be explored
yeah,
when you had this experience again with really pure LSD in the proper set and setting.
right,
Okay,
right,
right?
right, right.
That she felt it would have been child abuse not to share that with us.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
so
yeah.
you can't judge
No,
their
no.
behavior by today's standards.
Yeah, no, no, absolutely
Yeah,
not.
all
Yeah,
right,
yeah, yeah,
all right.
yeah.
Now, the reason I got to go to the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967 and hear Janis Joplin sing Ball and Chain, which brought me to tears, quite frankly,
Uh-huh.
at age 14, is another really cool story. We'll cycle back to Ramdas at this some point, but I gotta tell this
Going,
story.
keep going. This
Okay,
is good
I,
stuff.
so in the late 60s, Ravi Shankar and Alla Rasa toured the United States 6 months
Uh-huh.
of the year.
Yeah,
Ravi Shankar was the most famous sitar player. He taught George Harrison, blah, blah, blah. Okay. His tabla player, the drummer, was named Alla Rasa, and he was also like the most famous tabla player in India, right? My aunt was his mistress for 3 years in the late 60s. And I got to meet Ravi Shankar. I got to hang out a lot with Alla Rasa. Um, my aunt introduced Alla Rasa to Mickey Hart, the drummer of the Grateful Dead,
Uh-huh.
and they hit it off really well.
I'm sure they did.
Okay. But because Ravi Shankar played on Sunday afternoon at the Monterey Pop Festival, we
Uh-huh.
were living in Santa Monica near LA, and we jumped in a car and we drove up, for the weekend, right? And my memory, and again, there was a lot of really powerful Monterey Purple LSD that Owsley had made just for the occasion,
Yeah,
handed out free at this
yeah,
event.
yeah.
Okay, I didn't take any. I
No,
wasn't
no.
tripping. I didn't need to, quite frankly. you know, um, but I remember my most powerful memories of that um, are of course. See, Janis Joplin performed on a Friday night, maybe a Saturday, and for some reason her manager told them they couldn't film it because I don't remember why, and she was so pissed afterwards, and they brought her back for a second performance so they could film it,
Yeah.
and that's why I got to see her because
Oh,
that performance was in the afternoon.
oh, I see.
And when she finished when they got to the end of Ball and Chain, I was standing on my chair because I was a little, I wasn't quite full grown yet. I had to
Uh-huh.
get, and I was in tears, and
Yeah,
I was not the only one.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
then the other most powerful memory of Monterey had to do with Ravi Shankar on Sunday afternoon and how he completely blew everybody's mind. But these people, most of them had never heard this kind of stuff before. And
Yeah.
Ravi's concerts are long, they'll be like 3 hours. But the last 20 minutes of it is available on YouTube. I have a link to it on my website, which is a link to a link. But you can, if you just Google Ravi Shankar Monterey, it comes
Yeah.
right up because it's been viewed 2.5 million times. That 20 minutes has been viewed. It's so good. And I mean, that's like hundreds of times the number of people that were there that day,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
Yeah.
So, and in that last 20-minute clip, you can see, you can see in the crowd just going, you can see Mama Cass and the Mamas and the Papas and Jimi Hendrix and a couple other famous people, you know. And then so Robbie will do this thing where he would like put everybody to sleep by producing theta waves with the harmonics of theta waves, which is what you do in sleep, right?
Yeah.
And then you wake everybody up with this fast-paced stuff. And then the last part of it is this back and forth that is just, you can't believe that they could do it this fast. I mean, Robbie would play something on the sitar, and then Alaraka would repeat that on the drums.
Yeah.
You go back and forth and you get faster and faster and faster, right?
Oh my gosh.
So it just completely blew everybody's mind. Now, here's the story I get to tell. After the concert was over, and I've looked for myself on that clip many times. I can't find me. Right as the camera quit filming is when they got to where I was sitting. But after the performance was over, my aunt asked me to come up on the stage and help them carry the tabla drums off the stage and out to the trunk of the car. That's like a memory of a lifetime, right?
So you got to be on the stage at the Monterey Pop Festival.
Yes, after I never thought of it that way, but yeah. She asked me, she beckoned me. They wanted me. They put each drum. There's two drums. They put each one in a bag, and I got to carry one with them out to the car and put it in the trunk of the car after the performance.
So you were, and not only were you on the stage, but you were carrying the drums
that had just blown everybody's mind.
And will continue for generations to blow people's minds, it sounds.
Yeah.
Ah, man.
Yeah, okay, so my meeting of Richard Alpert before he became Ramdas was also kind of interesting, right? We had this house on the beach in Venice, and after the Watts acid test, Bear invited the entire band, the Grateful Dead, to come to our house for a party. And they all took LSD, and Phil Lesh wrote an autobiography called "Searching for the Sound." Right? On page 83 of that autobiography, it talks about a party at Gene's house. Gene was my aunt. So our house is in his book, right? That party is in his book about how, and there was one of the guys that there was with the band who had been to Vietnam or was going to Vietnam, and he had a freak out. And I remember him screaming and the cops coming and the tension involved and all that. But then, I was 12.
Right.
I didn't stay up all night with these adults. I was asleep by at least 1 o'clock. Right?
Yeah.
Right. So, but that's just that same house though is where Richard Alpert came not too long after that to visit my mom. And where I met Richard Alpert. Yeah. Now, Richard Alpert and I discovered a common interest in science fiction, in particular, a book called Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein.
Yeah.
We had both read that book. It had been published in only a few years before that. And we both loved that book. And in that book, the characters become water brothers. The plot is about this guy that comes from Mars to the Earth. And on Mars, there's hardly any water. So people use water as a symbol of like if you share water with somebody, it means your family, you got their back, you can share everything with them, and including their bed.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
In the book, because Robert Heinlein wrote it anyway. So my sister and Richard Alpert and I decided to become water brothers, and we
Oh.
formally took sips of the same glass of water. And then in the letters that he wrote us years later, he referred to us as his water brothers. And
Oh.
he would answer, he would sign the letters off, "May you never thirst," which is an expression from that book,
Mhm.
right? And so I asked him in a letter 30 years later if he remembered doing that, and he said yes, he remembered that very well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So that's okay. So that brings us to this point where we're talking about Ram Dass, and brings us to the everyday mystic aspect. So Richard Alpert, as he was back then, he was already really into this. So he was already at that point doing acid, right?
Oh, he said he did LSD over 400 times, right?
Yeah.
Before he
Yeah.
went to India.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But interesting that so he was into sci-fi and into and Stranger in a Strange Land.
Yeah.
It's funny because all of these books that you're talking about, I remember them because I'm 50, so I'm younger than you, but I remember all of these books on my parents' shelf. It's like as you say them, I remember the location on the shelf. I can even smell them. They were
Oh,
just
wow.
mysterious. I got very just a little peek of these mysterious books on a shelf, you
How
know.
fun.
So
How fun.
that's fun. That's my connection. So okay, so you guys became water brothers. How did you feel about this guy, Richard Alpert? Like I mean, you had lots. It sounds like your mom and aunt had lots of people coming in and out of your life with powerful people. It sounds
Yes.
like.
Yes, I was extremely fortunate to be born into a family that was right in the heart of some of the seminal hippie era events,
Yeah.
and hung out with some of the more famous people that shaped and influenced the whole hippie generation thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But interesting that you were a kid.
Yeah.
It's a different story because you're just a very impressionable period.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me more about Richard Alpert, who eventually became Ram Dass.
Well,
Um,
I don't remember a whole lot from that one meeting. I mean, he was like a tall, thin, kind of handsome guy, I guess, if I were to try to describe him on that day. I remember sipping. We went outside and and took sips from the water. My sister and I, and him, and I mean, he spent most of the visit talking to my mom and my
yeah.
aunt. Um,
Yeah.
I don't remember anything they talked about or anything like that. Um, uh, he just seemed like he the fact that he took interest in me and my sister in that book was
Yeah.
really exciting. Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Right.
Yeah.
But to you, did he emanate something special, or was he just another one of your mom's amazing friends?
Well, that I can't really tell because my memories are clouded by 50 years of knowing him as a famous person,
Right,
right?
right, 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 right.
Right.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
I really can't.
It
I mean,
doesn't. Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay, so let's continue on with the relationship that you guys had. So you met him that one time, and then when did you meet him the next time?
In 1969,
Okay.
just before he wrote, just before he got the book "Be Here Now" put together. Um,
Okay.
there's a page on my website, ramdasslove.org, about our visit to him at S1 Institute, where my
Uh-huh.
mom had originally met him in June of 1969. He was hanging out there at Ramdas, right?
Uh-huh.
And I guess we had just moved back to Sacramento. I don't remember, but we all went down to see him for the day, and it was a great visit.
Is this where what those photos are of?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And we'll
Yeah,
show
my
those.
aunt took some black and white photos. So on my website, there are a few photos of Richard Alpert and Timothy Leary from 1964,
Uh-huh.
the original. And then there's also some black and white photos of Ram Dass from 1969.
Uh-huh. Okay. And
Um,
so you guys hung out. It looks like you guys, from the pictures, you were hanging out outside on the side of the mountain or something like that.
well, Esalen is, the California, the big Sur coast is mountains going down to the sea, right?
Uh-huh.
And Esalen Institute is on this mountain on the side, overlooking the ocean.
Uh-huh.
And it was the grass was all brown. It was a warm summer day. The ocean was really blue. He asked me to help him make tea, and
Uh-huh.
we went. He had a little cabin. He was staying in kind of up a creek a little ways, and we made the tea, and then we had it on platters, and we brought it back to where everybody was sitting, and we served the tea. And my mom complimented him something about serving the tea, and he made one. He said the host must suffer, right? Just kind of throw, see, it's just a line. He just kind of threw it out there.
Yeah.
But I'm like a snarky 15-year-old, and I speak up. I say, what kind of Calvinistic bullshit is that? And of course, he beamed at me because that's pretty precocious for a 15-year-old to use Calvinistic in the word that way. But they got it, the adults got it. I was pretty good at making the adults, notice me that way.
Sure. And did he say anything? Do you remember a reply?
I don't remember what his response, except the smile that I got from him.
So what do you think he meant by that? The host must suffer.
Well, it's his Jewish background.
Uh, yes.
He was raised Jewish.
So did he like what I'm fascinated about Ram Dass, and I think what's always drawn me to him is his is that he's still the old Jewish guy. You know what I mean? And that he's we were talking in our group, about like he's still a schmuck, So like when you were there, like was he your mom and him had a friendship, so he wasn't treated as some kind of a guru when you guys were hanging out? No.
Oh, he wasn't a guru.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he hadn't written the book. He hadn't gotten hundreds and then thousands and then millions of people introduced to Eastern mysticism and spirituality. He hadn't done it yet.
Right.
In the trunk of his car, he had the notes that later became the book we hear now.
Yeah.
Okay. And then from Esalen that fall, he traveled to Taos, New Mexico, to the commune with I think it's Steve Durfee was it, and those artists at that commune illustrated his notes.
Okay.
And that became the brown pages. Eventually became the brown pages and Be Here Now.
Right.
But before it was published that way, it was published as an 11-inch by 11-inch square manuscript on brown paper.
Yeah.
Called From Bindu to Ojat.
Yeah.
Right. Bindu is those are centers of energy in the body. Bindu and Ojat. Okay. And it's about bringing the Kundalini energy up to the spine. Kind of thing. And it was published, and it was bound. It put out in what's called the box set.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you talk to John Stetskovich, he has a collection of them, and he has a whole pages on his website that explain the origins of it and then how it later became the brown pages and Be Here Now. People are always wondering when they read Be Here Now, how come the binding cuts off so much of the text?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, it's because it was originally published loose leaf.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
It had holes and it was bound with twine, so you could open it clear up and see. There was no binding.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, on my website, because my copy is was autographed by him, and it's so much larger. I took some high resolution photos of the artwork and put that on my website on one of the pages. Um, um, and so the artist illustrated it on this brown paper. The box set came to us in the winter of 1970, spring of 1971, somewhere in there, and it was really important because my mom had been working in as raising four kids. Her field was the aerospace industry.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the reason her and Owsley hit it off is that she had a degree in chemistry, and they could talk
Oh,
about the manufacture
yeah.
of LSD. Right?
Right.
Okay. In fact, I don't know that he consulted her, but I know they talked about that stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and what she did for a living was that she read complicated, long articles on things like rocket fuel and wrote abstracts for the scientists that were making the rockets that took us to the moon. So they didn't have to read the whole article, right?
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
About material strengths and all this stuff,
Yeah.
chemistry, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so by the late 60s, she was sick and tired of that, and she was sick of the smog in LA, and she had a bit of a nervous breakdown, and she ended up wanting to be a teacher. Now she had the degree for 4-year college. She had the education to be a teacher, but
Right.
in California, you have to have 2 years practice teaching to be a teacher in California.
Yeah.
And we're from Fair Oaks, which is near Sacramento. That's where her mom was, and that's where we are. Even though we lived in LA in the '60s, we ended up back in Fair Oaks later. Um, so when I was a junior in high school, and then again when I was a senior, she found out that these little bitty ghost towns out in the middle of nowhere, they don't care if you've had a practice teaching or not.
Right.
So we moved to Nevada. We moved to the geographic center of Nevada, a little
Uh-huh.
town called Eureka, Nevada, population 400, right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
100 miles from the nearest real supermarket.
Yeah.
Right? My
Right.
mom was my math teacher, right? There was only 60 kids. It was only 80 kids in junior and high school combined, right? And that's where my older brother graduated from there. I was a junior, but we kind of wore our welcome out in that little town because she smoked pot with the basketball instructor, and he got busted and told the principal. And so the next year we ended up in Joseph, Oregon, right,
Uh-huh.
which is a population of 800.
Uh-huh.
It's in the corner where Oregon and Washington and Idaho all meet,
Yeah.
and that's where we got the box set. And that's
Okay.
why it was so important for us. It came with an album that had chanting and mantras, and it was Ram Dass describing the mantra and then a group of them chanting it, right?
Okay.
And
Okay.
he had sent us malas. I have the mala that he sent us. It has the thread from Maharaji's blanket on it, and
Oh.
so that's when I learned to. So it came at a perfect time. I was a senior in high school. I was living with my mom and my younger brother out in the middle of nowhere really,
Yeah.
and it was the first time I ever was well. I wasn't used to places that like froze solid for the whole winter, but it did up there. And so we had this box set, and we had this album. We had what was the brown pages of Be Here Now,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it was wonderful. It was perfect.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we read it, and we chanted, and we I, um, and then um, so so uh, then I guess the next story that might be of interest to people has to do with by 1973, my mom had gotten a good job back in Sacramento.
Uh-huh.
We lived in Fair Oaks again because she had her 2 years practice teaching now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And um, I started going through a really hard time.
Mm-hmm. And how old
I
were you?
19.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Because I was born in '53, but it was in November, so it would have been very late in 1973 that I
Uh-huh.
turned 20,
Uh-huh.
right? So I started having symptoms of schizophrenia, and I
Hmm.
ended up meeting the full criteria, diagnostic criteria. I was
Yeah.
having command hallucinations and acting on the voices in my head and doing what they told me. And I came in and out of it. And my mom did a lot of research. And it turns out that it was probably related to a blood sugar problem.
Oh,
I
interesting.
was extremely hypoglycemic and I
Uh-huh.
was bouncing back and forth between a, a self-induced insulin coma and way too much glucose. Um, and anyway, but for the point of the story is that um, I was doing things like running away and hitchhiking out into the desert, and they had me in several psychiatric hospitals, and if they weren't locked, I just always escaped. And some
So
I escaped from some of the locked ones too. But go ahead.
I'm curious again. So your experience. So was it a frantic time for you? Was it wrought with anxiety, or was it megalomania kind of stuff? I mean, was
No,
it
it was very frantic and it was
yeah,
very anxious and it was very upsetting for my family. And my mom had a lot of guilt that maybe she'd done this to me by giving me the drugs
yeah,
and which was not the case at all. I mean, it was, that whole year I think I smoked pot once. There wasn't any drugs involved.
yeah, yeah,
There was some
yeah.
hitchhiker that picked me up and turned me onto a joint. And it happened to be on the Big Sur coast of California when that happened.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but um, uh, my so and you know my mom was told to expect this to happen to me frequently throughout my life, and it
Hmm.
never did. I'm one
Yeah.
of the very rare cases of people that met the full criteria for paranoid schizophrenia that never had any reoccurrence of those symptoms ever. It
And
just
do
doesn't
you
happen very much.
and do you think yeah, it's interesting. That's very interesting.
Right.
Okay, so I know Ram Dass kind of comes into this.
Yeah.
Explain
Yeah.
that, talk
Well,
about
it's a
that.
great story. It's a great story. So twice during this year, my mom reached out to Ramdas and called him on the phone. He was, I think, in Berkeley, somewhere in the Bay Area, and we were and asked him to check on me psychically,
Uh-huh.
right? Right. And I remember one of the occasions really well. I
Yeah.
was coming down the backside of the Sierras towards Carson City, which is south of Reno, and I with some guy that had picked me up hitchhiking, and his presence, for a brief moment, I was with him, sitting
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
silence, right?
Yeah.
And I, the kind of the vehicle, everything kind of faded except his presence. And
Interesting.
it didn't last very long, and there wasn't any exchange of words or anything, but I felt him, and I
Yeah.
felt him feel me,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then much later, when I came out of it and started acting and thinking rationally, my mom told me that he had called her and told her that I was safe, but I wasn't going to be home for a while.
Hmm.
Right. And
And that
apparently,
was true.
yeah.
How long were you gone after that?
Oh, at least another week or so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And did that change things for you having that experience?
No, it didn't change anything for me at the time. It was
Yeah.
very helpful to my mom.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it gives me a great story to tell now.
You were psychically connected to him. That's
Yeah, yeah,
amazing.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And then, oh,
Wonderful.
and the letter that he sent to me
Hmm.
after that is one of the most powerful, most important letters I ever received in my life. And it's the only one he sent us that has a little tiny picture of Maharaji on it. And
Uh-huh.
he would write letters on small paper, right?
Uh-huh.
And and um and I guess that so it says it has a picture of Maharaji and it has the Om symbol at the top and then it says Storm.
Uh-huh.
Because Storm is my real name. Stormy is my nickname. All right, it says Storm. Wherever your mind takes you or your body wanders, we are together. To truly be instruments of divine will, every vestige of our thoughts about our trip must float by. Let go. I am here. Shanti, 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 Ramdas. And this is a good example of how if I had had the ears to really hear, I mean, I don't say this with any regrets. I say this with irony, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So here's this 20-year-old receiving this letter from somebody that understands about what's behind that veil, and how to live and how to stay in touch with that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And I looked at that and it's like, oh, that's interesting. Now in my life, retired and looking back, it's so profound.
Yeah.
It's like that whole thing about, if I want inner peace, if I want inner joy, I have to give up all these thoughts about who I think I am.
Yeah.
And all this energy I put in all of my life into managing who you think I am.
Right.
Yeah, those roles. We have to give up every vestige of our trip.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. Will you read it again?
Yes, absolutely. And I've posted it a number of times, and I will post it again. Storm, wherever your mind takes you or your body wanders, we are together. To truly be instruments of divine will. A divine will are capital letters.
Mm-hmm.
Every vestige of our thoughts about our trip, in quotes, must float by. Let go. I am here. Shanti, 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 Ramdas.
And what year was that?
1974. He may have sent, I don't know exactly. He may have sent it in 1973, but I wasn't. My mom saved all these. She saved the envelopes. So on my website, I put it together pretty clearly, and I believe it was 1974. Excuse me.
So what are your thoughts about how was I going to ask this? About LSD, psychedelics, and the spiritual trip. Talk about it. Talk about that. Because
well, there's two things. There's two salient things. One is the LSD available now on the black market is not Sandoz grade. It's not Owsley grade. It's not Orange Sunshine grade. Okay, because in order to most easily manufacture really pure LSD, you need lysergic acid as a base to start the process, and it's still very freaking complicated. Okay, well, the government stepped in 1969 and made sure that nobody could get their hands on any lysergic acid. So once Owsley and Tim Scully worked through the stockpile that they had, then that was it. In terms of making the really, you can use mold, bread mold, right? Okay, in some process. But the Eagles have a song, Hotel California. And in there it says, we haven't had that spirit here since 1969. And I've always thought that's what they're talking about, okay? Because those two things just dovetail really well. Okay. Now I Googled that question, and there's no I can't prove what I just said.
Yeah.
But that's my feeling. So it has to be really pure LSD if you're going to use LSD. And there are similar ways to do similar things with psilocybin and Amanita muscaria and mescaline and other psychedelics. But the LSD worked best because the reason LSD is measured in micrograms, which is a millionth of a gram.
Yeah.
Right, the best is because it is. I always said it is a neurotransmitter, and Tim Scully corrected me when I was writing those blog posts. it goes across the blood-brain barrier and it activates a particular neurotransmitter. But the result is the same.
Mm-hmm.
Your brain cells talk to each other in ways they never did before and never will again.
Yeah.
And that frees your mind to create new pathways and to break free of old pathways.
Yeah.
And it induces a really physical sensation of everything being connected to everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which it is. We
Yeah.
just don't sense it most of the time.
Right.
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 So it opens your senses to that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The best trip I ever took was Christmas of 1966.
Uh-huh.
And I had just turned 13. Right.
Uh-huh.
And this guy came directly from one of the laboratories where they were making this stuff, friend of my mom's, and he put 3 drops in a gallon of water, right? And we all drank a half a glass of that water.
Yeah.
And looking back, I think it was probably like 1,200 micrograms or something. I mean, it's just a huge dose. You know? So I got to feel the presence of God and watch the walls melt at the same time. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
But, so my feelings are is one is it has to be pure and it has to be in the right set and setting.
Right.
Okay. I mean, I took LSD one time with my cousin to float down the American River because he had some problems, and we would we would do these things with a certain question in mind. We would read spiritual. It was like, the goal wasn't just to have a good trip. It was to find out more about ourselves or the universe or something. It was a purpose to this.
Right.
My cousin was having this horrible time. He was my younger cousin who was given LSD at age 8.
Yeah.
In 1965. This was been in the early 70s, and it wasn't real pure. And we took it and we floated down the American River, and we both got so freaking sunburned. We had to bail out and ask somebody to use their phone and call for a ride home. It was horrible. And I remember, and we never got to any questions about what was going on in his life. It wasn't the proper set and setting.
Yeah. Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
So it has to be pure. It has to be the proper set and setting. And then, even then, there is a diminished return aspect to it. Right? If people talk about taking LSD at every Grateful Dead concert for 10 years, and it's like, more power to them. But I don't see any advantage to that in terms of spiritual growth.
Right.
Okay. Because and Ram Dass even said, what I've always quoted. There's a couple of things I've quoted him about all of my life since I was young, and one of them has to do with this question. And he said that taking LSD is like looking through a window into a room of treasures, and what you really want to do is find a door to go in.
Yeah.
And then the diminished return thing is like, okay, once you've had this experience, what is the value of having it again?
Yeah.
Once your mind has been open to the fact that everything is connected to everything, right? And that there's a part of us that can live there if we nurture it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Then is there any value in diminished returns? The fifth time I took the trip in the proper set and setting, I didn't get near as much out of it as the first couple of times.
Sure. Well, because you were already, do you think you were already there by the 5th time? You already knew, or?
No, it was like reading the same book for the second or third time.
Yeah.
I knew it was going to. There was a part of the awe-inspiring aspect is the novelty of it. I think. It's like when your brain cells are talking to each other in ways that they never have before. You have insights that are unexpected, and you get some of those that every time you do it, but not near as many. I think as the first few times. And this is just my experience. I mean, other people could feel differently about that.
So, what do you think is going on with LSD and other psychedelics? Do you think? So let's say that this we are all one. I mean, what do you think that the psychedelics are basically allowing us to see this and to know that truth?
Well, I think it's experience of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. The knowledge is a little bit, I mean, yeah, it induces a feeling,
Right.
right?
Right.
Okay. And, the wonderful, I mean, it's kind of a shortcut. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. And that's why it has more, in my view, it has more limited value than a lot of people would say. Right.
Yeah.
Now, there was a lot of research. See, my mom gave my dad LSD as a cure for his alcoholism. Right.
Uh-huh.
And there was a lot of, because AA had this thing where spiritual awakening ended up helping cure people of their alcoholism, and this was a chemically induced spiritual awakening if done correctly.
Right. Right.
And that was in the 50s. There was a lot of research done, and then my mom having, but then the government cut off all research for 50 years,
Yeah.
40 years.
Yeah.
And MAPS is the multidisciplinary association of psychedelic studies, or something. And I've been on their email list for a long time. And there is finally a resurgence in the study of the clinical use of psychedelics for the treatment of depression and PTSD.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there is one finding going all the way back to the 50s that informs your question,
Mm-hmm.
and is the most robust finding, in the sense that they find this statistically significant every time they look at it.
Yeah.
Right? And that is, if someone is dying and they're terminal and they know they're going to die,
Yeah.
and they're afraid to die,
Yeah.
right? If you give them a heroic dose of a good psychedelic in the
Yeah.
proper setting,
Right.
most of the time they lose that fear.
Yep. Yep.
Okay?
I just
So
watched something. They said like 83% of
it's huge.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
beyond statistically
Yeah.
significant.
Yeah.
It's like, this is a fact. All right.
So
So the reason for that, though, is what
uh-huh.
you were just asking. Okay.
Uh-huh.
The reason for that is that it induces such a feeling
Yeah.
and which is kind of a knowing in a different way. It's
Yeah.
not an intellectual knowing. It's more of
Yeah.
a psychic knowing.
Yeah. Yeah.
That the universe is pervaded by this energy field
Yeah.
of love,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And white light consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then so when your brain cells are all talking to each other at once, you have an experience of that.
Right.
And and then from that perspective, it's like, okay, now I'm alive, and then now I'm not going to be alive, and it's all good, because we're just fragments of this thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's beyond space and time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So I know I don't know if you followed and I'm so bad with the author's name, but this pioneer with DMT, with the spirit molecule, is the book that he wrote. Are you familiar with
Oh, it's not Shugan. He was I think I know who you're talking
Richard?
about.
I can't remember.
Right.
But listen, I remember reading that, and they talk about the DMT elves. They talk about it's different than LSD. It's a very different experience, but you really step into this other realm.
Yeah.
And so my question is, and I know what my answer would be, but I just pose the question, is this real? Like, so some people do LSD, and I've talked to people who've done psychedelics, and they say, oh yeah, it's a trip. But it's not truth. But what you're
Right.
saying is that it's actually opening a window to a reality. Right? Am I right about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's how I've always conceived of it.
Yeah.
Okay. But again, this goes back to what was contained in the Book of Tao that we read to each other in those early experiences. And
Yeah.
that the premise of the Book of Tao is that there is this thing, right, that is all pervasive and is eternal and it's infinite and I don't know, omnipresent. There's a couple of more omnis in there.
Yeah.
And because we want to talk about it, we're
Yeah.
going to call it Tao, T-A-O,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But you have to remember that Tao we talk about is not the real Tao,
Mm-mm.
because the real Tao can't be expressed with just words.
Right.
You
Right.
and I are constrained by three dimensions in time.
Right.
This thing we're trying to talk about is not. This is so the varieties of religious experience by William James. That's another book that my mom and my aunt studied in the 50s.
Sure.
That led them to this path.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Because these are things that people have experienced throughout the ages.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And have had trouble trying to talk about.
Right. Right.
Right.
So what do you think? Can we as people get on without the psychedelics? I mean, are you?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And know that, step into that realm of awareness without, the shot to the brain, the shock to the brain.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is a beautiful thing about the core teachings of Ram Dass. And I have a meme that I made that is two long sentences that I want to share that is to me is the absolute epitome of everything he taught. Okay. But yes, we can get there without drugs. And historically, in a lot of fields, it involves sitting cross-legged on a mountaintop contemplating your navel for 40 years.
Right. Right.
Okay. And this is the beauty of his teachings, is that he presented Westerners with a way to get there, whatever, with this thing that is hard to put into words, right?
Yeah.
And the thing that you can, another letter that he wrote us talks about that. So I'm going to read the meme. I'm going to read this other letter. But the point is that, his teachings, it presented Westerners with a way that was attractive and accessible. He presented Eastern mysticism and spirituality in a way that made it available to us in the West, because it didn't involve sitting cross-legged and contemplating your navel for 40 years. Okay.
Right.
So the letter that he wrote us came to us. I mentioned that I had lived in Eureka, Nevada, and this is a letter that came to us in 1971 or 1970, and it says it has a little Om symbol at the top. And then it says, it lists my mom, my brother, and my two brothers and me. It says Marge, Forest, Storm, and Scott. Namaste. Are we in Eureka, Big Sur, Venice, South Beach, Ann Arbor motel room, or in each other's heart? We are all the family, capital letters. So every time we go behind the veil of differences in time and space, who do we meet but ourselves, hanging out all over? As we dance around the globe of light, may we never thirst. Shanti, Ram Dass. Now, what he's saying is that he lists, we lived in Eureka, he had been in Big Sur, we had been in Venice. He's from New Hampshire, which is the Ann Arbor hotel room reference, or maybe that was in, he spent some time in Michigan. Ann Arbor is, I think, in Michigan. I don't know. But he lists these places and then says, no, actually, we've been in each other's heart the whole time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then he says, we're all the family. Every time we go behind the veil of differences in time and space, the veil is all these differences. It's my judgments about, this is good, this is bad, you're tall, you're skinny. Those are the things that constrain us to the three dimensions. So to get beyond them, in the differences in time and space, we meet ourself, singular, not ourselves, but ourself, hanging out, just hanging out, like he hung out with me, for that moment when he checked in on me psychically,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So why don't I move on right to the meme that a quote that I wish I'd written down where I found this quote so I could refer people to it. But it was posted in a different the Love Serve Remember Foundation posted it just the other day. Okay, I'll go here, and then I go here, and then I have all these folders and subfolders. I want to, I pretty much know it by heart, but I don't want to miss any words. Okay, so it's two long sentences, and each one encapsulates the his two most core basic teachings, in my view. He says, once we get a taste of the freedom that comes with letting go of our stuff, that's anger, righteousness, jealousy, our need to be in control, the judging mind, just to name a few, we start to look at those things in a new way. That is the teachings of being in the moment. For someone who understands that this precious birth is an opportunity to awaken, is an opportunity to know God, all of life becomes an instrument for getting there. Marriage, family, job, play, travel, all of it. You just spiritualize your life. Okay, so what we have here is the first sentence is the book Be Here Now, the teachings of being in the moment. When you let go of anger, righteousness, and jealousy, you have those things are not in the moment. Those things are my mind projecting some other moment, right?
That's the veil that you were talking about.
Yeah. Okay. So you get this taste of that freedom when you let go of that. Then the next paragraph, the next sentence, really is his whole book, The Grist for the Mill, right? And this is what I was just saying about a path to enlightenment that isn't meditating, for 40 years. For someone who understands this birth is an opportunity to awaken, an opportunity to know God, all of life becomes the instrument to get that. You just spiritualize your life. I mean, there's only a couple of things that I've quoted him as all of my life. And the other one is this idea he said one time, I remember, it's been so long now. If you're going to be a garbage person, be the best, most spiritual garbage person you know how to be. You use everything, right? You use everything, right?
Well, and that second sentence that you read, the second paragraph that you read, that's the premise of my life work, is right. I think when I was a little bit younger and starting the quote spiritual path, and I thought, oh, I have to have my sangha, and I have to have my meditate, I have to be something, and the more I've been doing it, the more I realize, like, there is nowhere to be. This is just it. There's just that every single freaking thing, from a piece of dirt you find on the ground to a Zoom call, to my computer, to my computer mouse, my pen, everything, it's all it. So there's nowhere to go.
So I was exposed to these teachings, and it's kind of ironic that I heard what I could hear at the time, and then I went on. I had 2 careers and 2 marriages, and I fell into some addictions, and then now in retirement, in the last handful of years, I've started to study these teachings a lot more carefully again. Oh my gosh, my life is so much better. But one of the things that set me up for this is something that I've been working on for quite a long time, which is the whole concept involved in the kind of thinking that whenever I say I'll be okay when, right? I'm telling myself that I'm not okay now, right? And to the extent that I can let go of any of that I'll be okay when thinking, I can live more in just the here now. I can be more present. And from that, all kinds of stress and anxiety just falls away, right? So but none of these things are available to in a once and done kind of way, right?
No, unfortunately not.
Unfortunately,
We
not as
keep
long as
thinking they are. I
right,
don't know
right.
about you, but like I'll have my moment and I'm like, oh, I got it. I'm good now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah,
good.
yeah,
And
yeah,
then bam, God, just
yeah,
when you
yeah,
think you got it, it goes
yeah,
right back
yeah.
down.
Right. Yeah. And if you think you're enlightened, you're probably not. But there's one more story that is really fun. Okay. Um, we got that album. There was an album that came with the box set. We got that in 1971, and it was really profoundly influencing on me.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
1973, I was, I had come out of this year of being crazy.
Yeah.
Um, and I guess maybe by 1974, in 1973, he put out a six album called Love, Serve, Remember. And
Okay.
we got that six album set. And one of the tracks, it was half of it was question and answers from a radio show that he'd been doing in New York. And then the other half of it, it was him reading certain spiritual stuff. And one of them was the third patriarch of Zen. And that's available, his original audio of that. And the transcript is available on the Love Serve Remember site. And
Mm-hmm.
it's 1,400 years old. It was written, it's a profound short essay on how to transcend all dualities, right?
Okay.
And the first line in that is also something that has stuck with me ever since 1973. And it says, the great way, which is a euphemism for the path to enlightenment, right?
Mm-hmm.
The great way is not difficult for one who has no preferences, right? Now, this is a truism. It's true, okay, but it's not the whole truth. It's true in the same way that Buddha said, attachment is the root of all suffering.
Yeah.
That's true, okay.
Yeah.
And for the longest time, I thought that meant that I should have no preferences and I should have no attachments. But that's not the whole story, okay? It's the clinging to them that's the problem,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
So if
Yes.
preferences and desires and expectations and attachments are the problem, it's not that I have them. It's my not letting them go. So
Mm-hmm.
I practice radical acceptance, right? Radical acceptance is letting them go. The
Yeah.
minute I
Yeah.
notice the universe has shifted and it's not going the way I expected, or that I thought I needed it to, or that I wanted it to, or that my preference would be, right? I get this mind frame of, oh, I guess we're going this way now. What do I have to do to be safe, secure, and of service going this way? You know, it's just, I don't care anymore. I'm just
Yeah.
along for the ride kind of thing, But that's what these teachings have brought me to now. Okay.
So
You want one more part of that story, if
yeah.
I may? Okay.
Yeah.
So I was a snarky 20-year-old when this album came out. And there's a line in that essay that says that in order to be enlightened, you have to give up all desires, including the desire to be enlightened, which is a
Yes.
paradox. It's
Yeah.
one of the
Yeah.
many paradoxes
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
encounter on the spiritual path,
Yeah.
right? As Ramdas says, opposite things can be simultaneously true and
Yeah.
different planes of consciousness, right?
Right.
So I went around telling the adults in my life for a while that, oh, I can give up the desire to be enlightened. I guess I'm enlightened now.
Oh, this is wonderful. This is wonderful. I think we need to do a follow-up podcast with just the wisdom of Stormy.
That would be fine.
So it's interesting because your window was open, your door was open very, very early. And yet you spent how many decades still in the human traps? I mean, you said you've dealt with addiction and marriage and divorce and jobs and everything. So you weren't just, you got to step into the room, but then you were ejected.
Yeah, I left. Yeah, I left on my own accord. I wanted um, the pursuit of materialistic pleasures. I
Yeah.
guess, you know, I mean, we're embedded in a society that tells us that happiness comes from the new car and the big house and the picket fence and the 2.4 kids, you know.
Right. Right.
You know, of course, I got tired of all that. Of course, I did.
Yeah. Yeah.
My karma this time was to learn those lessons and then be here talking to you about them.
Yeah.
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 And my journey as well. So why are we here? What are we doing here? I mean, if we know that we're all one, I mean, we're doing this somehow remotely through computers and
Right.
satellites or
Right.
whatever.
Right.
If
Well, the only answer I've ever come up with to that ultimate question of why
Yeah.
is that we're here in order to ask why.
Oh,
Okay. Why am I? To ask why. I wrote that some time ago.
I
If you
never
want to
heard
if you want to
that.
delve a little bit more into the wisdom of Stormy for a second, there is something that I wrote that has stuck with me after these early experiences of looking behind that veil
Yeah.
and the awarenesses of the experience of the connectedness of everything to everything. Um, I wrote something. The first line is kind of like a motto that I've lived by. I guess maybe it's a motto. The first line is actually attributed to Aristotle,
Mm-hmm.
and it's something you may have heard. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
what I say is that is my religion,
Yeah.
or maybe that is the core of my religious beliefs.
Yeah.
Right. My philosophy is that I am sometimes a whole and sometimes a part.
Yes. Yeah. 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 And that goes right with all of the Eastern teachings.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All the
Yeah.
mystic teachings, not just
Yeah.
Eastern, but Western as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
wrote that when I was 15.
Oh, s- wow. So okay, so you're 60 now?
69.
You're 69.
I'm
Okay.
going to be 70 in the fall. 70 is like really old, right?
So I want to
Okay.
tell you something that I've been thinking about is that I'm watching generational. So like you are a step, if you want to talk about trajectory, and I personally don't know if this is just a circle or if it's a spiral. I don't know. And
Right.
I don't know. And I don't kind of really don't care. But when we step into the vision that this is a spiral and we keep going in, outer and greater, which is more of a new age kind of view,
Right.
then where you are being one who the veil was lifted at a very young age is a step beyond. We honor Ram Dass, we honor Leary, we honor the Grateful Dead, but perhaps we're the next rung out of the spiral. Do you know what I'm saying? If we're going to talk linearly, and hearing you talk about what you're saying, when you start getting into your the stormy wisdom, I'm like maybe we're the next step, and I don't know. I don't know the answer, but I watch my kids,
Oh, yeah.
and they're beyond me. I mean, the
Yeah.
stuff, the level of comfort they are with sexuality, gender, is the gender fluidity, that stuff that I understand and I embrace, but my old self is kind of, oh, this is a little weird, but it's fascinating. It's like it just keeps expanding and expanding. So I don't know. Do you think
Well,
that?
I'm pessimistically optimistic about the future of humanity on this planet. Okay.
Yeah,
But I do take the bigger view, which is that there's lots and lots of intelligent life in the universe.
yeah,
And if we were to destroy all of it on this planet, it would hardly make a drop in the bucket compared to
yeah,
what's really out there.
yeah,
The distances are so big that we'll probably never meet any of that, but
yeah,
it's there, and
yeah,
and and you can feel it when you tune in, and the numbers don't lie. I mean, if 1 in a billion stars has planets with life, and 1 in a billion of those planets has intelligent life, that means there's billions of intelligent life planets out there right now.
yeah,
Those are the numbers. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but you know, uh, so I'm cautiously optimistic. But there's something I've been saying for a very long time that it came to me really from these teachings and my whole experience in life, and that is that if you Krishnamurti is quoted most famously as saying that it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. Okay. And, we can't see the forest for the trees. We're embedded in a
Yeah.
profoundly sick
Yeah.
society.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And as far as I'm concerned, the source of most mental health pathology,
Yeah.
right up to mass shootings in our culture,
Yeah. Yeah.
it comes from the repressive nature and this rugged individualism. And our culture is asking us to do things that are opposite of what evolution designed us to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, if you want to raise emotionally healthy, emotionally intelligent, emotionally stable, compassionate, caring humans, you have to do that in the context of a village, of a tribe, of a
Yeah.
close-knit extended family.
Right.
Because
Right.
that way, just to solve one problem, which is divorce,
Yeah.
where nobody wins nowadays except the divorce lawyers who get
Yeah.
to pay off their yacht, right?
Right.
Okay. There's absolutely no reason that any child should be left without appropriate role models in their life.
Yeah.
Okay, which is what happens with
Yeah.
divorce in the modern era,
Yeah.
right? When my dad, I struggled for male role models because of a divorce, right? As a child, a very small child. So, you know, I think that the younger generation is progressively with each generation tapping into some of this ancient wisdom about how it could be, and we're going to slowly over generations correct it's like the industrial revolution took humanity off onto a path that is really dark. Okay.
Yeah.
In terms of our psyche, in terms of our spirit, in terms of
Yeah.
our caring for the planet, for Christ's
Yeah.
sake,
Yeah.
and that I see it in my youngest daughter and both of my. I was married young and had two girls, and I got married much later to a younger lady and had two more girls, and I've been single for a decade from that. But um, I love my life now more than ever. I just love it. But in my two youngest daughters, I see what you just mentioned, that they are um, they are striving towards creating a world. I mean, in talking with Tim Scully and Don Douglas and looking back at all of the events of the '60s, including the Watts acid test and the Monterey Pop Festival. And I wasn't at Woodstock, but I know quite a bit about what happened there. Um, we were so naive. Oh my gosh, we were so naive.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If you had asked me in 1969 about 2020, I'd have been like, oh yeah, war, that's all, hunger, that's all in the distant past. We've got all that solved by then, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of it's worse than ever.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh God. Okay.
So maybe, so stepping into these, like I spend much of my day going either into, duality, getting pulled into the duality and then pulled out to the other level
Right.
of oneness.
Right.
And I wonder if, when we step onto the plane of oneness, like it's almost like I can feel Ram Dass, like, and Maharaji, and it's like, isn't it wonderful?
Yes. Yes. It's
So
all perfect. Don't
yeah,
you see? It's all perfect.
Don't you see? It's all perfect. And so maybe that, I think that, so right, when I asked that question, is that, are we going somewhere? Where is there to go? Just like you were
Right.
talking about, who,
Right.
like, where is there to go? It's like, what, but this is, and so, And maybe that's just the catch, is that we think there's a direction. We think that you and I are separate beings talking, that all of this is something,
Well, I think that I used to have these long conversations. My aunt, by the way, really helped raise me. I ended up going to live with her a few times, and the one that was a follower of him is, my mom's, my aunt, my mom. I had long conversations with her about reincarnation because I had a slightly different view on it than she did. She was more traditional. It's like, you come back and over and over until you learn your lessons this time, and then you don't have to anymore. And I'm like, no, what comes back is the essence of humanity. If somebody tells me that they're Napoleon reincarnated, I don't take that literally. I take that to mean that the essence of Napoleonness is out there in the space-time continuum, and they happen to tap into it. Right?
Exactly.
So we are evolving, and it is progressive. And one of the things that's helped me understand our current situation, which is so freaking bad in so many ways, is this. There's a Center for Spiritual Living here in Reading. It's kind of like Unity Church, and it is based loosely on the teachings of Ernest Holmes, who wrote a book, something scientific spiritual. I can't remember right now, but anyway, I was introduced to the idea there that if somebody's doing something that is just abhorrent to me, I like to. I was told to think about it in terms of, I don't know what spiritual lessons this person needs to learn this time around.
Right.
Okay, and that's helpful to put it in a context that isn't personal to me. Right? Well, in the past, with the political, since the election of 2016, I've been thinking of our entire country that way. It's like, I don't know what lessons the United States needs to learn this time around.
Exactly.
But clearly they're significant, right? Okay. Now, whether we learn them or not, okay, is still an open question. I have lived, Becky, I have lived all of my life with the threat of nuclear Armageddon. When I was in the 4th grade in Fair Oaks near Sacramento, we did the duck and cover from the Cold War air raid sirens, right? And I knew then that the adults that were running this world had their head up their ass. Because ducking under my desk wasn't going to save me from a nuclear weapon. Not in the least bit, ever, right? And so, we've managed not to blow ourselves up, but it's like, a lot of the excesses of the 60s and the 70s and the backlash to that came, later with Reagan and all that, was in response to this existential threat to humankind, to all humanity. Right? And now that we've managed to not blow ourselves up for the 50, 60 years that the nuclear weapons have been available to do that, it's starting to, it's like a pendulum. It's starting to come back more towards the center. But what's helped me personally is this. I started studying astronomy, and in my first year of college in 1971, I took astronomy, and I studied it as a layperson ever since. And I was so friggin' excited for the James Webb Telescope. I can't tell you. It's just amazing. It's like, but what's helped me with this resolving the existential threat to all of mankind and possibly even life on this planet is this bigger view. Whenever I get my panties twisted in a knot, if I can reframe it in a bigger picture, then a lot of the stress goes away, right? And the bigger picture is what I mentioned earlier about the amount of life out there. Okay. The numbers don't lie. When I took that astronomy class in 1971, they did not know for sure if other stars have planets around them. No, they all do. The process that makes a star makes planets at the same time, every time, right? And they did not know that the universe was 3.5 billion years across. Okay. They
Yeah.
thought maybe a couple 100,000, right?
So here's a mind-blowing thing. You were talking about, like we could blow each ourselves up, and then but there's still, there's stuff out there that this isn't it,
Yeah.
this isn't it, but that we can never, they're so far away we may never contact them. But I have a friend who's since passed, who her name, I don't know why names just drop out of me. I knew her years ago. Phyllis, I'll post it later. But so Phyllis lived in this small town, Flagler Beach, where I moved to 10 years ago. And Phyllis was an old Jewish lady, and I knew her just as a Jewish lady. I did Passover with her. But I found out before she died that she actually was a world famous channeler, and she actually was a channeler for Rod Serling for a number of years. She was friends with
Really?
Rod Serling,
Oh
so
my God.
she channeled beings from other planets. So everybody channels different things.
Yeah, of course.
But when you were talking about this, I think that I went back to thinking about how Ram Dass was able to contact you in that moment, right? And this is
Yeah.
all big woo-woo stuff, and depending on
Yeah.
listening, this is all, up for
Right.
true opinion. But Ram Dass contacting you, but here was my friend Phyllis, who could talk to beings, I don't know if they were in other dimensions. They were actually, Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
She was the channeler. So she was the channeler for the Nine, and she channeled them from deep space. Okay,
Oh, how funny.
so that was her
Yeah.
connection. So
Yeah.
cool, like just
Right.
crazy stuff. So we don't know. Like, I think when you go beyond that, this physical stuff of like, oh, we're this many light years away. No, we're not. We're here. It's all
Yeah.
here. It's
Yeah.
all simultaneous, and this might just be one just big vast explosion right now, and we're just like these little, like,
Yeah.
we're dividing it into time, and there's no time.
Right. Right. So here's the process that I think our planet is in right now in terms of its evolution.
Yeah.
Okay. You remember how they persecuted Galileo for saying that the Earth went
Right.
around the sun?
Right.
Okay. They had at the time the worldview was geocentric; everything revolved around the Earth.
Yeah.
And he proposed a heliocentric view,
Right.
where everything revolved around the sun.
Yeah.
In terms of religion and spirituality, most people on this planet are stuck in a geocentric view.
Yeah.
Right? It's all about what happened here 2,000 years ago, or Mohammed, or Confucius, or even Ram Dass. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've always taken the view, it's like my view, my image, my conception of God or a higher power or the cosmos. My conception has to also be one that could be available and conceived of by the intelligent life in the Andromeda galaxy, because there's a lot of it there too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have just talking to you, all this like stuff, and like my mind is blowing out. It's like I'm like, oh wait, what about this? Like, what if
you realize we've been talking for an hour and 45 minutes now?
I know, it's okay. It's okay. I'm watching the time, and it's okay. I edit stuff out. We'll take this is all good. It's all good. But I'm going to tell you, so you talked about, you said geocentric, heliocentric. So this like where I'm at with my spirituality, and this is, we'll edit this out, or maybe not. But it's almost like like, this sounds so like narcissistic, egocentric, but what if we are the center of the universe? Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, everything we're like, it comes to that, down to that thing that we are the gods of our own creation. And this is, I mean, we're manifesting this as we go. We can only know what we know. So like, what if
you know how a holograph works?
Yes, vaguely.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, every little piece of it is actually the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm the
Yeah.
center of the universe,
Oh
but
yeah.
you are too.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And there's no, and that's why it's a hard thing to talk about, but it's like, but I can only see from this, it's what's the Grateful Dead line, from like the eyes of the world. What is the line? Wake up to find out that you are the eyes of the world. Right.
Right.
That's it.
Right.
That's it. It's like we are just the eyes of the world. So, but this thing I call Becky, and this, I'm looking at myself in the video right now. This thing is just story, and it's just how I've chosen to incarnate. Just as you've chosen, and you're. I mean, it's mind blowing to think we're all having. It's like I say, it's like we're the fingers of God. And what happens is so we're all connected to the hand, we're connected to the body, but when you stand from the perspective of the finger, we look different. You know what I mean?
That's a great analogy. I love that.
Yeah. So here you and I are looking at each other and we're like, oh yeah, we're different. You're there in California, I'm here. But really, we're connected to the whole thing. Yeah.
What I talk about has to do with like that third patriarch of Zen essay about transcending all dualities, and it really, really lays it out perfectly. Yeah. Okay. And that is that as long as I'm incarnated into a body, right, I'm going to not be able to transcend the basic duality of self versus non-self.
Well, because we have to. I have a body.
It's not a big deal. When I drop the body, then then that one goes away too.
Yeah, but I think not to make too big of a deal about it. It's like, yeah, we're here, we're gonna, and like you're saying, like the attachment stuff, it's like, yeah, we're attached, it's okay, like I think that's where the kernel of enlightenment comes from, is being okay with that. It's it's like okay, so I'm attached. I mean, I don't know your perspective on addiction, and I know you've been through, but to me, I know Ram Dass and Katie talk about this as well. But it's like, it'll drop. It's okay. You know what I mean? I think, I was talking to a friend this morning about depression, and she's like, my baseline is just slightly depressed. And I'm like, okay, so be depressed. I was dealing with addiction issues, love addiction issues. I went into a wonderful therapist who's become my mentor. And, and my friends are like, oh, you keep going back to this abusive relationship and all of that stuff. And my therapist is just like, he's like, yeah, so like, keep, like he would just be like, go, it's like, he didn't say like, indulge and get destroyed and get beat up, but it was like, just do what you do.
I think that I heard Rob Ross on a podcast once answer a question about greed, I think it was, and his surprising conclusion was, go forth and be greedy, just do it mindfully.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh. No, this is my life right now. I'm a good, white upper middle class woman. And you're supposed to not eat meat, or all these little things that everybody says as a spiritual person, as a, whatever I am, you're not supposed to do. But, I have a sugar addiction, and I love sugary coffees. And, and I like a good cheeseburger. And I know the karmic value. I mean, talk about karma, eating a cheeseburger, holy crap, and what it's doing to your body and all that. But it's like, no, I'm just going to eat my cheeseburgers. I'm going to drink my iced coffee, but I'm going to,
again, the path that Ram Dass laid out for us, and I'm so happy to have you and these other people that in our Sangha as guardrails to help keep me on that path.
Yeah.
The path is not the one of a renunciate.
No.
Right? No. I mean, and there's no proscriptions about there's no, thou shalt not. Okay.
Right.
There's none of that. Right. But what there is this overarching overlay of do it mindfully. All right. Do it, do it with the best intentions that you can muster.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Do it from your compassionate heart. Do it with, centered from the present moment. Right.
Yeah, well, and so I've been really like going down like the tantric path, which is
Yeah,
fascinating, which is something I always kind of, because tantra in the West is, it's just an excuse to have sex, which is
yeah,
fine. That's
right,
okay too.
right.
But
Can I
tantra
make a joke?
but what's that?
I have a joke that fits in here.
Okay,
Okay.
go ahead.
I haven't developed it fully, but it has something along the lines of, um, you know, uh, dating criteria, and finding that girl that has as her favorite book, the Kama Sutra. That's the one. Yeah.
When I met my husband, who I'm now divorced from, but I didn't really know him that well, and I was just kind of getting to know him, and he invited me over to his apartment, and we were just hanging out, and I noticed on his bookshelf he had like the secrets to ecstatic sex or something like
Right,
that, and I'm
right.
like, okay, I'm in. We ended up never even opening the book once, which I'm like, okay, maybe that wasn't but but yeah, but tantra, which is everything. It's
Yeah,
everything. And
yeah,
so the tantrikas that I study are much more hedonistic. That's something I don't. And I think Ram Dass talks about that with the siddhis. Like, he really plays it down. You know what I
yeah,
mean? And I honor that. I think, now I'll tell you, the more I do this stuff, the more the siddhis just come. I mean,
yeah,
it's just how it is. It's just,
yeah,
it's just the
yeah,
the synchronicities and everything, and the magic and the manifesting is just, it's just part of the trip.
yeah.
But I like how Ram Dass, says, "Oh, don't get too distracted by it," because I do have a lot of
Well,
friends. Yeah, you want to manifest money, you can. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
but this goes back to something I experienced really young, and that is, if that's the goal, then you're off on a tangent. You're
Yeah,
not
yeah,
on
yeah,
the
yeah,
path.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I had my experience is another funny story. So my aunt got her PhD in parapsychology,
Uh-huh.
right?
Oh,
And she
cool.
yeah, from the Saybrook Institute, and she hung out with Stanley Krippner and Stanislav Grof, right? She
Uh-huh.
knew all those people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and but along the way, we talked about telekinesis and telepathy.
Sure.
Her dissertation was a double-blind study where she trained people to synchronize their brainwaves using brainwave feedback, biofeedback equipment.
Mm-hmm.
Most of it was engineered by Tim Scully, by the way, the one that produced all the LSD. He made biofeedback equipment for my aunt, starting in the late '60s, early '70s. Anyway, and he's a very brilliant engineer.
Yeah.
Um, but so she trained them in brainwave synchronization, and then did a double-blind study with remote viewing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And she got statistically significant results, right? But long before that, I had been introduced to these ideas of telekinesis, and so I went to Reno, right? And I'm gonna control the dice with my mind,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I'm gonna come home with money,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I didn't come home with any money. But, but what I came home with was an understanding that my effort to control the dice
Yeah.
is exactly what prevents me from
Yes.
being able to
Yes.
control the dice.
Right, right,
Right.
exactly.
Right.
It's the paradox. It's
Yes.
the ultimate. I did the same thing. I was reading a lot about manifesting, and I did the same thing. I did it with it probably didn't cost me as much money. I got a lottery ticket or a scratch and win, and I sat there and I said, no, I am going to win. I
Right.
am going to win,
Right.
and I scratched, didn't win anything. But what was interesting was what happened afterwards is I
Right.
pulled back and I
Right.
observed. And
Right.
I observed the feelings, oh, the feelings of disappointment. And there was, the feelings of, what if I don't have power? And I went on this little trip, like literally sit in my car with a scratch and win. And I'm like, whoa. And I don't know, it was like this strange awakening of just like, like just pulling back from it, and it's like it doesn't matter. It doesn't
No.
matter when you do the observations. It doesn't matter. And ironically, that's when you start gaining power.
Yeah,
Is when
yeah.
you
Well,
let go.
Rhonda, one of his more famous quotes has to do with that. When you give up all desire for power, you have it all,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
But there is one other thing that has helped me all my life that I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention, and that is what he taught about cultivating the witness. Now,
yeah,
other spiritual teachers have introduced this idea, but no one as directly and concisely and as helpful as Ram Dass,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Because he talked about looking at your life like it was a movie playing out on the screen,
The
right?
Lila. Yeah.
And I remember when I was in graduate school, I went back to school in midlife and got a PhD in clinical psychology. And in that process, if you get through the first year, we had the study group, and one of the members of my study group was this young lady, and we were talking one day, and he was all tore up about this relationship that was going south, and I remember telling her, and I used the same way ever said about cultivating the witness. This was in the early '90s, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I would do is I said, Danielle, this is what I do. Okay. I hold my hand out in front of me and I cup my palm and I visualize my entire world in the palm of my hand. And I look at it and I say, oh, isn't that interesting? Here's this Stormy dude. And he has all these fears and anxieties and worries, and he's thinking this isn't going to turn out, and he's sad that this didn't turn out right, and oh my gosh, that I wonder how that's going to turn out. Isn't that interesting, right? And suddenly the sky is no longer falling, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Suddenly I get some emotional distance from my
Yeah.
emotions,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I'm better able to think rationally about what the next move is,
Yeah.
right? I'm better
Right.
able I'm better able to put the whole thing in a bigger picture
Yeah.
and reframe it, you
Yeah.
know?
I find that the witness is the goddess. Is for
Yeah.
me, that's how I see her. And it's
Uh-huh.
the mother. And
Yeah.
it's the mother that we probably will never have in physical form. I'm sure she's out there somewhere, but I didn't have that mother, and I probably wasn't that mother either. But it's the mother who is just the lover as well. She's also the lover. She's Krishna. She's, and
Yeah.
she just, you know what I mean? And when you you kind of, when you step out into the witness mode, you become Ram, you become Krishna,
Yeah.
you become Durga, you become, and you can just hold that. And when you hold that position, you, like you said, you start to make movements in your life that aren't self-destructive. You know what I mean? And because you're doing it with love, you're not doing it with all the mess. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like, the best way to not get trapped is to not be um, is to be something more than the human our culture wanted us to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, I think that, because you were talking about earlier about the education system, and, and we can get so hung up on how this world, this material world is failing us and blocking us, but maybe that's just what it's supposed to be doing. What did you say earlier about, that we're just here so we can ask why?
Yeah.
And
Why am I? Okay.
yeah.
I made a meme. Why am I? To ask why.
Congratulations. Yeah, it's wonderful. All right, well, I think we should wrap up with, it's
I think
noon
so too.
now,
Yeah.
so I noon
Yeah.
here, so that we did
Right.
2 hours.
I
That was
know.
wonderful. Like, I'm
Yeah.
telling you right now, I'm gonna stop it. Thank you so much, Storm, but stay on, because we're gonna talk for a second afterwards.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Becky.
You've been listening to Secrets of an Everyday Mystic with author Becky Magnolia. To listen to this podcast in its entirety and other podcast interviews, please go to magnoliamystic.com. Thank you for listening.